Hi, I'm Lisa Rubel from Quilty Zest, and I'm here today to show you how to turn fat quarters into a really cute pennant banner that you can hang for the holidays. As you can see, I'm in full Halloween mode here, so I used this fun bundle of Halloween fat quarters from Sit and Sew Fabrics to create my little pennants. You can do this with any fat quarter bundle. You can do it for Valentine's Day, for Christmas. Just do some happy, bright, cheery colors to hang year round. It would be great for a birthday celebration if you find some bright prints and put it up every time there's a birthday in your house. But pennant banners are super easy to make, and you can customize them with your fabric choices. Like I said, they work great with the fat quarter bundles that are available on Sit and Sew's website. You can also do it with a pack of 10-inch squares. The pennant template will fit nicely on that. And speaking of fat quarter bundles, behind me I have a couple other projects that I've created using Sit and Sew's fat quarter bundles. And you can find these projects, 2 different baby quilt options, and then this table runner on the Sit and Sew blog, and you can find that at sitandsewfabrics.com. So here's what the pattern looks like for the pennants. Again, it's set up for Halloween, but you can use it for any occasion. And this pattern is a free download when you purchase a fat quarter bundle. There's several different options of free patterns that you can download. And today I'm going to walk you through making these cute pennants. So let's make some pennants. Now, the pattern for the pennant banner comes with 2 different sizes of templates. There's a small one and a large one, and you can see on the page the small one is actually tucked inside the large one. So decide which size you want to make, just to show you what they look like. Here is the small and here's the large, so you can kind of get a feel for how they look. And so I'm going to be demonstrating how to make the small one today. The large one goes together in the same way, just with bigger pieces. So let's talk about how to cut these pennant shapes efficiently from a fat quarter. So I'm laying out this orange and black striped fat quarter, and I've got my template piece here. And we're going to be cutting them 2 at a time, because when you sew these, you're going to put 2 right sides together and sew around the outside edges. So it makes sense to cut them 2 at a time with right sides together, because then you're ready to sew. So what I did after pressing the fat quarter was to fold it just enough over so that my pennant fits on it. If you fold it in half, you've got a lot of fabric waste. And because we're just cutting straight lines, I'm going to do it with a ruler and a rotary cutter. You can put in pins and cut with a scissors if you want. But what I do is just line up the ruler with the edge of my template piece and just cut it with the rotary cutter. And if you're doing multiples, what you can also do after you do the first one is to turn it and do another one right here. And that will be an efficient use of fabric, and you can work your way all the way across that strip. So once you have your pennant shapes cut, again, this is 2 that are right sides together. What we're going to do is put a couple pins in to hold it. Okay, up at the top there. And then what I'm also going to do is mark the bottom point where I want my stitching lines to come. So the template has a 1/4 inch line on it, and if you can just line up your 1/4 inch foot on the fabric as you sew. But to know exactly where to put that point, what I do is I fold the one edge over on the line, and I'm going to line up my other 2 edges. And then I'm just going to mark a little dot down at that point. And it might be hard to see because, of course, it's on the black stripe there. But as I'm stitching down, I want to be aiming for that point with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now that that is done, I'm going to put in a couple more pins to hold these pieces together. There we go. So for the stitching, we're going to leave an opening up here at the top for turning. So the first thing I'm going to do is start right about here, take a couple stitches forward, and then back stitch a couple so that when I turn it, I'm not tearing out my stitches. So I'm going to use the pencil to mark, and I'm going to stitch over here near to this corner. When I hit the 1/4 inch line, I'm going to pivot and come down here, stitch down to the point, pivot, stitch back up on this side until I get about a 1/4 inch from the end, and pivot and stitch in just a little bit here again, and then back stitch. So I'll have an opening here in the center to turn it right side out. Just a word about thread. Because I'm using a variety of colors of fabric, I chose a neutral color, this darker gray, that goes both with light, dark, and medium prints, and that way I can use the same thread all the way through, even when I top stitch my pendants, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So here's my stitched pendant, and you can see I went from here down to my point, around, and then that, and I've got a little opening up at the top. So I'm going to show you a trick before I turn it right side out. What I'm going to do is fold back this top edge in line with the seam that I stitched and give it a little press. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. And why I do this now is because it's a lot easier to press it when I'm going up against that stitched seam. And then when I turn it right side out, I'll still have those nice folded edges for a clean top. Okay. One other thing I'm going to do before I turn it is I'm going to just narrow up this seam allowance down by my corner point, making sure that I'm not cutting into the stitch line, but the less fabric I can have there, it's just little tiny pieces, but the less fabric I can have there, the sharper point I can get when I turn it. So now I'm going to start turning. And when I do this, I have a little turning tool that I use, and you have to do it both gently and firmly. And if it feels like those two directions contradict, you just have to be patient, because if you push it too firmly, you'll poke a hole through. But if you don't push it firmly enough, you won't get a nice point. So just have patience, push gently. And the top corners don't matter quite as much because they will be covered by the bias strip that we use to attach all the pennants together, but it's still nice to get them pointed. And then let's see if I can get this corner a little bit more, thanks to getting rid of that extra bulk. And then what I do is I run the pointy edge of this tool along the two side seams, and that just helps to get them in the right place so that it's not folded over too much in one direction or the other. Then I'm going to give it a nice press to get it flat. And there it is. So one optional step you can do, which I prefer to do, is you can top stitch down just the V of your pennant, because again, this top edge will be covered. But if you top stitch down that edge, and if you are using a neutral thread, you can use the same thread for all, but that will just give each pennant a nice finished look. So let's talk a bit about directional fabrics. So this cute ghost print, the ghosts are all pointed up. And in order to have them going the right direction on the pennant, we're not going to fold the fabric in half and do it that way, because half our ghosts would be upside down. So basically what that means is one of two things. You can either, I'm going to flip this the other way. So basically that means one of two things. You can either cut two pieces separately, just like this, or you can fold it in the other direction so that the two pieces that you're cutting will both be ghosts face up. And you'll see when I cut, what I do is I cut the main 3 lines. And then I go back and just hit the little corners, not even without a ruler. And there are my pieces, and you can see both of my ghost halves are facing right side up. The other type of fabric to consider is one that has something you want to fussy cut. So with the size of these little orange moons and witches, I could in theory have an entire pennant that doesn't have a witch on it at all. And the witches are really cute, and I'd like to have one. So what I'm going to do is pick a spot with one of these orange witches, and I'm going to roughly center it on my pennant shape. So we'll be fussy cutting these, which means you may not get as many out of the fabric, but I think it'll be really cute to have that witch there. So for this one, I'm definitely going to cut one at a time because I want to fussy cut a witch for each side of my pennant. So now we're going to make a bias cut strip that we're going to use for the top edge of the pennant. And we do it bias cut, which means cutting on a 45-degree angle, because fabric cut that way has some curve and some stretch to it. If you do it just with straight strips, when you go to hang your pennant, it won't have that ability to curve quite as nicely as it will with the bias strips. So we're going to cut this out of yardage. And you can absolutely go to your local quilt shop and buy a thing of double fold bias tape, but it's more fun to make your own because A, it's a new skill, and B, you can use any fabric you like for it rather than being just having to choose from the colors that your quilt shop has. So let's look at how to do this. I've got a 1/2 yard of black solid, and I've got a long ruler that you can see has it has a number of angled lines, but the one we're going to be looking at is the 45-degree line. And you can do this with a smaller piece. You can do it with a fat quarter. The drawback of that, or even a smaller piece of yardage, is that you will have to piece more strips together. So by doing it with a 1/2 yard, you have less piecing to do, and you can make longer bias strips. And you'll still have fabric left that you can use for other projects. So what I'm going to do is line up that 45-degree line with that folded edge of my fabric. The fabric is folded in half, the selvages are down at this end. And I'm going to cut across here the rest. So there you can see where I cut. I'm going to move it down and cut some more. So I'm going to set that off to the side. And now what I'm going to do is cut 2-inch wide strips working off of this line. I'm going to very carefully flip this over so that I'm on the correct side for cutting. You can see I've got a lot of little thread schnibbles on my cutting board because now my black fabric is full of thread schnibbles. So I'm going to line up that diagonal line that I cut with the 2-inch line on my ruler. And you can also see that my 45-degree line aligns with that folded edge, so I am looking good. And I'm going to cut a strip. And there it is. And I'm going to cut a second one as well. How many of these you need depends on how big of a pennant you're going to make, how long you want your pennant to go. So I'm just going to cut a couple and show you how this goes together. But depending on how many pennants you put in your banner, you may need more I like having extra as well, so that at the end, I've got plenty if I want to tie it onto something. So then what I need to do is I'm actually going to cut these off square because that's where the fold is. And I'll show you how I'm going to use those square edges. I do the same on this piece. End up with little squares. And then I'm going to join these. And when I join them, I'm going to keep one down. And this is a solid, so I don't have wrong sides or right sides, but you want to have right side up if you're using a print fabric. So we're going to go right sides together. I'm going to align them at this end. And I'm going to put a pin in to hold it. Hold those edges together. Then I'm going to grab a marking pen, and I'm using white because I've got black thread, and I'm going to mark from corner to corner. So my pencil's a little wide, so I've got my ruler moved over, but this is going to be my stitch line. So after I stitch on that, I'm going to trim off past 1/4 inch of my seam allowance, and if I press it open, then I've got a longer strip. So I will add all my pieces the same way, and then what you're going to do is you're going to press this seam open. And I'm just finger pressing it for the moment, but it allows, you'll have less bulk than when you go to press things together. So I'm going to get the rest of my strips joined, and then we'll talk about the folding. Okay, my strips are all joined. And now I'm going to press that seam open for each of my spots. And I used gray thread because I wanted it to be easier to show, but ideally you would use a matching thread to whatever color your fabric is. So black would be a better choice here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold the strip in half and press the whole way along. Now, as I said, this fabric is cut on the bias because we cut it on the 45-degree line. I'm actually going to turn my iron. I've got a little more surface to work with. And so it has the tendency to want to stretch. So you want to be careful as you go that you're not pulling. You're just lining it up and pressing. So if you see here where this seam allowance is, because we folded them open and because they're sewn on the diagonal, when we fold it in half, it spreads out that seam allowance. So we don't have one area that is really bulky. We just have a little bit of bulk over a larger area, and that makes it easier to use this. Okay, so coming up on the next join, just going to press this all the way to the end. Now that I have the whole thing folded, what I'm going to do is unfold it, and I know this is hard to see on black, but I'm going to go back and fold one side into that center pressed line. And we're going to do that on this side, and then we're also going to do it on the other side. Okay, once you've folded your two short edges in, we're going to refold on that initial line. And so that means that all of our edges are folds and the raw edges are tucked into the center. And you want this to be a nice sharp press. So you may have to refold your the side folds a little bit, but go nice and slow so that it really heats up the fabric and creates a nice sharp edge. So same thing, I'm going to do this the whole length of the fabric. So I've got my double fold bias edge binding strip created, and now it's time to put our pennant banner together. And just to give you an idea, from the 2 strips that I cut, I ended up with about 76 inches of binding strips. So that's what I'm going to work with for this project. So I've got 10 pennants that I'm going to use and my double fold bias strip. So what I'm going to do is find the center of this strip and mark it with a pin too. So that's the order I'm going to go with for mine. And what I'm going to do is pin them all in place. And so I'm going to start with, so I've got 10, so I'm not going to put one right in the center, but I'm going to put these 2 together in the center. And the other thing you can do is you can also spread them out if you like that look, rather than having them all touching. You can have them overlapping, it's up to you. So I'm going to take this first one, and you see my open edges are folded in nicely, and I'm going to line it up with that center fold line right there. But I also want to make sure, and I'm right next to the pin, I want to make sure I've got that edge, that bottom edge folded in. So I'm going to lay that, line it up with that center fold. Now I can take this pin out, and then I'm going to fold that edge and fold it over the top. So I'm basically encasing the top edge of my pennant inside the center of that bias tape. And then I'm going to put in a couple pins, and you want to make sure with your pins that they go all the way through all the layers. So it looks the same on the back, because on both sides I have those raw edges folded into the center. So I'm going to move on, take my next piece, line it up on that folded center edge, and fold it down and pin. And again, double checking the front and back, they're both folded. I'm just going to keep working my way along, adding more pennants, making sure they're always lined up on that center line, and the back and front of the double fold binding is folded all the way over. So I'm going to add them all on like that. I've got all of my pennants pinned into place inside my double fold bias strip, and now it's time to sew. And what we're actually going to do is start all the way at the end of the strip. So if yours has come unfolded like mine has, I recommend putting in some additional pins just to hold it. It'll make it easier when you go to sew. And you'll notice I have all of my pins pointing in the same direction, and that's to make it easier to pull them out as I stitch. So you want to do this at both ends. Get your whole strip set up, and then we're going to sew the whole length. Okay, last one. Okay, so if you, just to look again at our double fold bias strip, it is one strip of fabric with the edges folded in and then folded again on the center fold. And so when we're stitching, we're going to stitch through all 4 of those layers. And then when we get to the pennants, we'll also be stitching the pennant into place. So you want to stitch not quite on the edge, I would say a scant 1/4 inch from that bottom folded edge, and that just ensures that you always get what's on the back side again. I recommend using a matching thread to your strip and just sew straight from one end all the way across, all the way to the other. And I'm starting at this end because then it's very easy for me to pull the pins out as I go, as opposed to doing it this way. You're kind of pulling the pins out against how you're working. So sew that whole strip, and then your pennant banner will be complete. So here's what my completed Halloween banner looks like. Super cute. I love these tiny little pennants and all of the fun Halloween prints. The last thing that I do then is I tie a little knot at each end of that strip, just because it's a raw edge down there. You can also fold it over and hem it if you want, but the knot works for me. And then you've got, I've got, I don't know, what is this? About 15 inches on each end for wherever I tie it up. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to make these pennants. Like I said at the beginning, they're great for not just Halloween, but you can do them for Valentine's Day, for Christmas, get a bunch of bright and fun colors, and just do a happy sunshiny one to hang up year round, or put them out for a birthday. Depending on what fabrics you use, you can make these for pretty much any occasion. And they're quick and easy and just so much fun. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Head over to Sit and Sew Fabrics and check out their collection of fat quarters, which work really well to make these pennants. You could also make them with 10-inch square packs, because you can put the template down on the 10-inch square and you can get a nice variety of fabrics in that way as well.